So by this point in the course, you're probably wondering a little bit about how we can make objects symmetrical. And the way we're going to do this in Blender is by using a mirror modifier. Now, what a mirror modifier does is it looks at your entire mesh and it will duplicate and flip the direction of all the points on your mesh across either the X, the Y, or the Z axis. So we're going to use Suzanne here again because she is a symmetrical mesh. She is symmetrical across the X axis. So let's come in and edit this a little bit so we can see better what we're doing. So select Suzanne and tab into edit mode. And now I'm just gonna make a few changes on one side of the mesh. So let's say we want maybe the sort of area around the eyes to be more round. And maybe make like more of an earlobe. Okay, so let's say we've made these changes to this right side here. And we want to know how can we reflect it so that this mesh is now symmetrical. So in order to do this, let's add a mirror modifier. Now, there's sort of a older method and a newer method for using the mirror modifier. The older method would entail a little bit of prep work up front. So what you would need to do, because Blender is looking at every point in this mesh and is going to reflect it, we need to delete half of it so that we don't end up with duplicate vertices. So we could tab into edit mode, move into wireframe view, select all the vertices on one side of the mesh, press X, and delete the vertices. We are left with this half of the mesh that is cut perfectly in half along the line of symmetry. So now, to reflect this across the X axis so that we have these edits made on the other side, all we need to do is come into the Properties Editor panel, go down into the Modifier Properties tab, and click on the Add Modifier dropdown. Now under Generate, we're going to scroll down until we see Mirror, and go ahead and select that. That will add the Mirror modifier to your modifier stack, and you can see already that this half of the mesh has been duplicated and flipped onto the other side. Now, that is the more traditional method of using a mirror modifier, but Blender has added a couple of options in here to make it go a little bit quicker. So let's just start from a new monkey. Let's tab into edit mode, and again, let's make changes to one half of the face. It doesn't really matter what changes you make. This is just to make it different on one side so you can see what is happening. So let's say we like these changes and we want to mirror them across the X axis. Now, instead of coming in and manually deleting and reflecting these, Blender has added some new features to the mirror modifier. So all you have to do is add a mirror modifier, clicking Add Modifier, Mirror. And now, at first you will see why I deleted half of them in this, and that is because we are getting these duplicates over on top of each other. As you can see, if I disable the modifier and enable it, it's reflecting both halves on top of each other. So we're getting this sort of strange thing happening with the mesh. So instead of deleting half first, what we can do is use the bisect and flip options. So what bisect will do is essentially it will perform the operation I did on this one of deleting half of it, but it will just do it automatically based on the line of symmetry. So if I enable bisect on the X, you will see that the sort of duplicates that were causing issues on this portion of the mesh are now gone. And it is reflecting the side of the mesh that I had made changes on. Now, I believe by default, Blender will always use the right side of the mesh as you are facing it to reflect across to the left. However, we can flip which half of the mesh we would like to use by coming over to the flip options and clicking X. Now this has restored our original mesh because I did not edit this half. It is now looking at this left half of the mesh and reflecting it onto the right side. Now you'll notice there are axis options for each of these, and that is just a setting you can select to tell Blender how you would like this to be reflected. So by default, we want this reflected across the X because we added this symmetrical object and it is facing forward. So reflecting it across the X takes this side and reflects it onto this side. Now we can reflect it across the Y, which would reflect it this way. We can see we now have symmetry going this way. Or we can reflect it across the Z by highlighting the Z. You can also reflect across multiple axes at once just by enabling them here. I'm going to delete this object. Now, one point to note about the mirror modifier is that it will always reflect based on the location of the origin. So because our origin on this model is perfectly aligned with this center edge that represents our line of symmetry, our model is being mirrored properly to form one cohesive object. What I mean by this is that if you tab into edit mode, select this half. Now I'm actually going to delete this half because I personally do not tend to use this bisect feature. I prefer to have it just based on half, sort of a older method, but that is how I learned it. So what I mean about the origin is that if I come into edit mode and I move these faces away from the origin, it will split the mesh because Blender is still reading this line passing through the origin as the point to reflect from. So it is reflecting this empty space as well as the mesh. Now, if you wanted to lock the vertices that are along the center line together, you could do so by coming into the Mirror Modifier window and enabling clipping. And you'll see that the tooltip, when you hover over it, it just says prevents vertices from going through the mirror during transform. So let me show you what this means. So I've already shown you that without clipping on, we can move parts of our mesh, and if they move away from the origin, it will cause a split. But if I enable clipping and I now grab it, you'll see that those vertices that were on the center line are now locked. So that even when I move things away, instead of moving and creating a split, it is locking this line and it's stretching our mesh out. So obviously, if you're working on something like a character, you probably wouldn't want, a hole in the middle of your face. But let's say you're like, oh, I need this. I want the face to be wider. So you'll notice that when you have only half of a mesh and you're using a mirror modifier, some of your transformation tools, especially scale, will not necessarily work the way you expect it to. So if I press S and then X to widen this, you can see that we're having an issue with this mirror modifier sort of clipping into itself. So if I enable it and grab instead of scale, that is how we can move the pieces of our mesh around so that they can be a little bit wider, and it will maintain this seam right here. So the mirror modifier is one of the most commonly used modifiers in Blender because it enables us to do the work of creating an entire model in only half the time it would normally take, because we only have to model one side. Now, if our model is something that has sort of two-way symmetry, we can even further reduce this. Just dividing up my mesh. So if this model needs to be the same all the way around, we can further reduce the modeling time by deleting everything except for a corner, a fourth of it, and adding a modifier. So this modifier by default is one way across the X, but if we added the Y to it, so now from here, if we wanted to come in and edit this and we knew that every side had to be the same, it's just much quicker to model a quarter of a model rather than all four sides. So that is it for now for the mirror modifier. There are, of course, a couple of advanced settings for it, as there are with most things in Blender. For now, do not worry about anything that I have not covered. The most important things you need to remember about the mirror modifier is that it is a method for reflecting and duplicating across an axis. It's most often used to create symmetrical objects like characters. You can change the axis or axes that you wish to reflect, and you can lock them together by enabling clipping. So we're going to do a quick demonstration on using a mirror modifier, and in future videos we are going to cover a few more of these modifiers.